desperately try to keep Blake's claims alive by playing hide and seek discovery. So making it harder for Wayfair to get a hold of the discovery necessary and get the answers that they need. And then as far as now updating this and making his name be the CEO, they said that you can't go back in time and change anything. So if at the time the lawsuit was filed with Vanzan and it wasn't current and no one's name was on it, according to the records in the state, they can't go back in time now and claim it was Ryan and change the outcome. That the company was not in good standing when the lawsuit was filed. The company had missed 3 separate years of filing biennial statements at the time it was filed. Because they were past due, it's questionable that they could have been able to have a contract with anyone. And if they are behind in the state, how can they seek relief to the state in a court if they're not in good standing? They can update now, but that doesn't change the fact that when they did file, they were not updated. It doesn't change the fact that when they did file, there was no name attached to Vanzan as far as the state was concerned. Vanzan was just a company that had a registered agent. Now Ryan is saying, oh, it's my company. Judge Lyman was so convinced that there was absolutely no evidence that could ever become available, that would ever Wayfair has said, and that now, after he's been dismissed, he can be like, yeah, it was me, thinking he pulled one over. And I somewhere imagine him in duper's delight, believing he's gamed the system and he's won. And I hope he doesn't, because this to me is criminal. And I hope somewhere there's someone watching. I mean, Ryan is someone that has been and I'm not political dispute with Baldoni. It looks like he's more involved than he's claiming. It looks like he's acting as her agent. It looks like malice. The lawyer also said that at this point, it proves that Blake and Ryan are a team, that they're working collaboratively with counsel, and they're playing a game of whack-a-mole. So they're trying to, like, when one issue comes up, they're trying to use each other in different ways to get out of things. They also said somewhere in their brain, they must be thinking about spousal privilege under New York law to limit the scope of discovery. But that attached is to a spouse as an individual, not a spouse as an executive of a company. So meaning that if Blake and Ryan had something personally happen to them, they can say spousal privilege. But in this case, he's acting as a CEO of Vanzan, not as Blake's husband. So she doesn't have privilege if he shares information with her about that. And that this is being used to try to get the light off of Blake. And they believe that if Ryan isn't involved, or this is being done for revisionist history, they're doing this to other than a sham action and used to abuse process and obtain discovery before going to court and get an unfair advantage. And then the judge in this case, when they tried to subpoena the same information from Jen's phone and from Baldoni's phone, he quashed the subpoenas and said it was an invasion of privacy. How would he then justify Vanzan having the same access to all of that without saying this was an invasion of Jen's privacy? It was an invasion of her privacy. He's already ruled it was an invasion of her privacy. He didn't allow it in his case. So if he allows it for Vanzan and he says, oh, everything's fine, this is totally proper, he's bought and paid for. And if I were Wayfair, I would appeal. And I don't know if they're going to appeal. I haven't spoken to anyone about if they will appeal. But this to me is more proof of malice, more proof of the coordination between Ryan and Blake, the fact that Ryan and Blake are acting as one and an entity, not as husband and wife, that Ryan's hands are all over this case, just like agent, inserting himself into her lawsuits. They can no longer use the excuse in 2025, husbands don't speak for their wives. If that's the case, why is Ryan's company involving themselves in this dispute? I asked a lawyer who I work with, who remains anonymous, about this, and this is what they said. Ryan may have been dismissed, but he's not immune to being subpoenaed or deposed. And these were the questions she said if she were asking Ryan at deposition what she would ask Ryan. Why did your shadow company subpoena Stephanie Jones in a breach of contract claim suit? Why was the scope so overly broad that it didn't even pass muster under Lyman in the later filed SDNY case? Yet, despite the epic fishnet, you were satisfied with the contents of a single mobile phone. And why did your attorneys not recognize the metadata was missing? And why did the evidence produced end up in the hands of your wife and then the New York Times? When it's framed in this way, it makes Ryan look terrible. It makes Ryan look like he's the one initiating this feud. Whether he's revisioning, like doing the revisionist history now, right? And trying to cover for Blake, how does Ryan justify doing a lawsuit in his shadow company, subpoenaing only one person, getting the contents of one phone, and then handing over that evidence that he got through his company to the New York Times and to Blake? That would make it seem like the feud is not between Blake and Baldoni, but it would be like Ryan using Blake as a shield for his disproof that Ryan Reynolds and the claims of what he was doing were not anything more than him acting as a spouse and that he believed what his wife was telling him. He said there would be no amount of evidence that could prove that he was working as an agent, but instead he was a husband. But did the judge know about the Vanzan lawsuit before this? Because when he was filing and this order and working on this order, he had written in a previous order when Wayfair tried to use the crime fraud exception to get the Edgeworth Securities information about this, about the extraction of data. He said there was no proof that this subpoena through Vanzan and the Vanzan action was used to extract and get the data. He said there was no proof that Vanzan's lawsuit got Blake the evidence. Well, now the judge looks like an idiot and that he was wrong because he said there's no proof. Well, there is proof now. There is proof now that it was used. She's admitting it was used. So it makes the motion to dismiss seem premature. And this is why you allow lawsuits to go through discovery, because through discovery, you find the facts. And now we have the facts. If anything, this would be more grounds for Wayfair to appeal the case and appeal the rulings on the motion to dismiss, because they can say, there is evidence. Here's some evidence of him acting as her agent and not as her husband. I think, and this is just my opinion, is that Ryan might believe that because he's out, he can do this. And he believes that the case is dismissed against him by prejudice. So they can't sue him again for what they already claimed against him. So he believes that he can just do this now because he's shielded from being liable, not thinking that he could possibly be appealed and have it overturned by a higher court. And I also believe that Ryan thinks that this judge is on his side. So regardless of what he does, he'll look the other way. I spoke to several lawyers about this, and they all said that if the judge looks the other way and does not rule that this case, the Vanzan case, was anything on Jen Abel's phone and Baldoni, then Baldoni should have been added to that action. But why would he have not been added to that action? Well, because then they would have known that Jen Abel's phone was subpoenaed without notifying them or Wayfair. They used an end around, and instead they took that evidence, closed the lawsuit, came to court, admitted they have the evidence from this lawsuit that wasn't used for any other purpose than for that subpoena, as a way to conceal their identity and launder the evidence through a lawful quote unquote subpoena. And then she represents to the court that she is Vanzan. And then Ryan today files his updated records to Vanzan, which again, nothing has been filed for Vanzan since January of 2019 until today. And now he's claiming that he's the CEO. Ryan has tried to long maintain that this has nothing to do with him. And Blake's attorneys have said that in 2025, husbands do not control or speak for their wives, right? When it came to Ryan running around saying that Justin was a sexual predator, they said that he wasn't operating as Blake's agent. If Ryan is now Vanzan and trying to subpoena Blake, Jen Abel's phone for a dispute between Blake and Justin, it would almost strengthen the fact that he was an agent for Blake. And this is again why having this case dismissed, Justin's case dismissed with prejudice, not giving them an option to amend, now that they have this evidence, would certainly be grounds to prove malice. If anything, it would also prove that he is acting as Blake's agent.